Welcome to 28 Days and Beyond.
The show where we talk about our history, our heritage, and our culture.
I'm Amari.
I'm Charisma. Welcome.
Charisma.
AJ.
History, heritage, and culture.
Yes.
Let's just jump right into it.
You're doing math. Yes. Whenever you do this, you're doing math. Okay.
One of the things that I'm really excited about, hesitantly excited about the times in which we live.
Okay.
There is a renewed excitement, curiosity, exploration of an African identity.
Okay.
So, you can see this in things, people paying to give somebody their DNA, but that's a whole, DNA tests, things like that, right? People are trying to trace their heritage back to the African continent. That wasn't always the case, right? People, once upon a time, people were
ashamed.
Yeah. One of the worst things you could do was call somebody African, right? But that's not so much the case anymore. What are your thoughts or your ideas on this African identity?
I mean, I think it's wonderful, but I'm curious to hear what your hesitance is, because you said you were a bit hesitant about the new found excitement. Yeah. So what are you hesitant about? Because I have outside of testing my DNA, because I just don't trust that process.
That's part of what, so my hesitancy is about this excitement can easily lend itself to exploitation.
Yes.
Right. So, I remember when I was an undergrad, I read this book by Robin Kelly, and he talked about the idea of like the Afro. We know it as a sign of Black power and Black beauty and Black pride, but he was actually talking about how part of it was a marketing ploy on behalf of corporations to make more money off of Black people, right? So I'm always a little bit skeptical in terms of like, who is it that's fanning this flame?
Right.
Either way, the product I think is beautiful. Yeah. When I was in high school and I was, coming into my awareness, I remember I started to grow my hair out and people make fun of me and people. Now, of course, that is
it's embraced.
Of course, we see natural hair.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful thing.
I mean, it's still, unfortunately, I think it was it last year? Where in California, it just finally got put on the records where you could not discriminate against a person as far as employment for their hair. Right. So it's like we've made these huge strides,
certainly,
right? But at the same time, we still have a ways to go. There's still a lot of things that need to happen. But I'm happy to see more people embracing their African heritage and their roots. Yeah. Despite the fact that some people might not have the best intentions with it. I think it's exciting.
But one of the things I think is important, though, is like it's really about self-determination. So Black people, as we say, Kujichagulia, we are determining our destiny on our own terms. That's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
And it coincides with something that happened last year. 2019 was deemed the year of return. Yes. Right? So Ghana and other countries in West Africa would open up their doors to allow diasporic Africans, people who are descendants of those who survived the Middle Passage, to return to Africa.
And a lot of people did.
And, a lot of people
did.
A lot of dollars came through and really sort of contributed, right? But today we are joined by Dr. Molefi Kete Asante, who is the chair of the Department of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University, to dive into the year of return, the concept behind the year of return, and just an African identity in general. So got a good discussion today, and we'll have more when we come back on 28 Days and Beyond.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. We are now joined by Dr. Asante. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
It's really good to have you.
Well, it is really good to have you.
I got so much I want to talk about.
I know, like he's like ready to jump in already.
And this is a great opportunity. Dr. Asante, you have had an amazing career. You have developed the theory of Afrocentricity. You have published over 83 books. You have founded the first PhD in African American Studies in the world. In the span of your career, how would you say you have watched the development of an African identity amongst Black people in this country?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and thank you so much for having me on your program.
Oh, it's our
really
pleasure.
Enjoyed it, yes. Already, I've just enjoyed this beautiful program, beautiful set. The trajectory of African American identity, or African identity, as far as that goes, has been one that has been uneven, deeply uneven, because we are not born into a society that necessarily affirms us. Sometimes our families don't affirm us. So there are other times, of course, we are born into periods of life in which there is an ascendancy of African consciousness. And because of the ascendancy of African consciousness, we simply fall into it. And we become, as in many cases I was, conscientized, mainly because of the 60s. As a child growing up in the 60s, there seemed to have been at least a moment in the history where there was a great emphasis on identity. It seemed like it was a great emphasis, but it probably was not.
Interesting.
Because always you have these vanguard moments, you see, where it appears that there's something happening that's universal, but it may not be universal, and it probably was not. There was a small portion of African American people who had a strong sense of consciousness, and in effect, that dictated to a large degree what was out in the general public. But when you count the people,
Right.
it was probably much less than we thought at the time. Those of us who were in, we knew that the revolution would come tomorrow and that everything would change in America, that it would be a whole different society. We did not expect or did not understand, because when you're young, you don't understand all of the appendages of a system. And so we didn't understand how the system would strike back,
Right.
and how it would basically distort some of the things that we thought we knew.
That's
But then,
really
yes.
interesting. Because I remember having those conversations with my mom, even as a younger person, where she would say, you know, in the 60s, there was this movement of, you know, Black empowerment, Black power, you know, where we really started to embrace our identity. And then so many things were implemented to tear that down.
That's
All of our leaders were killed or jailed or, you know, dispersed. So.
Excellent. I mean, your mother's correct. I mean, and she probably was right there with me thinking that, boy, I mean, everybody is believing this. And we know that this is going to happen. But Samora Machel, who was a former leader of Mozambique, made an incredible statement years ago after the revolution in Mozambique. And he said that the masses of the people would have to go through the war and the revolution against the colonial powers, because that was a university. That was the way you got your consciousness. But in effect, what he discovered later was that everybody didn't go to war, so everybody was not conscientized. Their consciousness was not raised by the war. There were small groups of people who participated in the war compared to the millions of people who were basically not participating. And I think in the African American community, we have the same.
Wow.
You're hitting on some very, very important topics, a lot of which we have to jump into when we come back from this break. So we'll be back with more 28 Days and Beyond and Dr. Asante.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. We are still here with Dr. Asante. So we were talking a little bit before the break just about, you know, what happened in consciousness as far as the 60s, even till now. Now, you know, we talked a little bit about just this resurge of Black identity and the year of the return last year and celebrating that. What are your thoughts on where we are now in terms of the year of return and just where we are as a collective?
Thank you very much, Charisma, because I think that we had talked when Amari was talking with you earlier about the notion of the commercialization of identity.
Yeah.
And I think that the year of return is a very powerful concept. And that the notion of commercializing identity, African identity, and making something of it in an economic way has caught on not just here but also in Africa. And I think that the fact that Ghana, which is a country I love very much, has taken the leadership in this, will also put Ghana in an economic position vis-a-vis Africans in the diaspora that's going to really catapult the country over many of the other countries in Africa. For me, the notion of the year of return is a good one. I don't want to criticize it, but I think that the problems I have is that along with commercialization comes the notion of branding and comes the notion of celebrity. And so to a large degree, the notion of bringing back to Africa the celebrity blacks in the diaspora is a very commercial kind of thing. It's good. I mean, I'm not, as I say, I don't want to knock it, but I want to say that in addition to the celebrities, many of them who probably had no understanding or appreciation of their identity in the first place, that even though that is good, it's the masses of African people who must be brought into this discourse so that we have a conversation, and not just in the United States, but the black people in Colombia, where you got about 30% of the population of Colombia are Africans. In Brazil, you see, in Ecuador and Peru, you have to bring the Caribbean people into this discourse. And once we do that, I think Ghana's leadership in the year of return and years of return will be very meaningful because other African nations will be engaged.
How can we do something like that to bring the masses of people in, as you say?
I think, Amari, what we have to do is to, we got to start very early with children. I mean, when a child is 3, 4, 5 years old, we have to give children a sense that, you know, one of the things you have to do is to remember the rites of return. And there'll be rituals of return. When children are in high school, when they finish a particular moment in their lives, you say, you got to go, you got to return to Africa. You at least go and visit, see, and so on. And I think that those rituals will help to reinforce those values.
That's really powerful.
It's interesting because I know Amari and I have talked about this before, even as far as going back to Africa. I've only had the pleasure of going back once. But we were even talking about just ticket prices versus going other places. It's so expensive to go back to Africa, and there's so many channels, and you have to get this shot or this vaccine, and it's like all these things that have been implemented that make it much more difficult than going other places.
Absolutely.
You could go to London, like like $300.
Right, exactly.
It's cheaper than going to California.
It takes $3,000 to go to South Africa. No, it is. You're perfectly right. I think that they say, I mean, of course, the corporations will always say this, that it depends on the numbers of people who travel, and that there are not enough people traveling to Africa. But I'm sure in Ghana and Nigeria, Senegal, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who travel to those countries, and the prices ought to be cheaper.
And more people want to go back.
That's true.
So it's good that we're seeing that's not going to be something that can be said for much longer, because more people are reaching back and wanting to go back.
That is true. And I think it's very useful.
We're out of time. Dr. Asante, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, I really enjoyed this. This was very nice. Thank you. I hope you guys have me back.
We
on.
absolutely will.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back with more 28 Days and Beyond right after this.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. Charisma, it's always good talking to Dr. Asante.
Well, this was my first time meeting Dr. Asante.
Oh, is that right? Oh, well.
Such a pleasure.
Well, let me let you know, in the future, it'll always be good to talk to Dr. Asante.
Well, now that I know that.
Right.
One of the things that Dr. Asante said that I found very interesting was not only reaching back and making the connection to people of the diaspora to Africa, but to other places in the world. Recently, I went to a conference called the International Association of Blacks in Dance, and they had a conference. They had a bunch of different, sessions, and one of the workshops that they had was about the history of Black dance in Australia, which is something that I had never really, I never really learned about it. But just in terms of seeing how the diaspora has really just been all over the world, and seeing where we're connected
Yes,
to places all over the world was been.
There's a lot of black people in the world.
I mean,
And it's, I think, in terms of like gaining a sense of identity, a sense of self, right? One of the things that's important to me is like when people say, oh, black people refer to ourselves as minorities. I'm like, yo, you
No,
have
we're
no
not.
sense of self. We are actually the global majority.
We are.
And if you identify as a minority, what is a minor? Right? A
It's
minor does
less
not have
than,
full right to
right?
that, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you're already truncating yourself and your potential. But if you identify yourself as a global majority, that means there are more people in the world that look like you than look like the people who are calling you a minority.
And you know what's interesting? More people are starting to realize
Exactly.
that. And
Exactly.
I was taught that from the time that,
beginning.
yeah, like
Exactly.
my parents were like, listen.
Which is another thing that Dr. Asante was talking about in terms of teaching about a right to return. It's a birthright. I think that's such a beautiful concept because,
is.
you know, if we look at other groups, you know, Muslims making Hajj is a part of their religious identity, their cultural identity. You know, Jewish people returning to right their holy land, and Africa is ours.
Yes.
And I think that all black people should make as many trips to the continent as we possibly can.
see as much of the
see as much,
continent.
because it's so big and
It's
it's
so big.
You know, it's like, you know, you talk about a diversity. Yo, black people are some of the most diverse
Yeah.
people on this planet. You can have 20 black people in a room and still have it be a very diverse
Yeah, like
room.
completely
So
diverse.
I think that's a wonderful concept. And I mean, there was just so much there.
Yeah.
I am, despite my, you know, hesitancy, I am excited about the potential.
Me too.
Black people are at least open to these ideas in a way that I think could really benefit us.
And my goal is to actually return to Africa
Right.
at some point this year.
That's what's
So-
up. And you balling out of control, so pay for my ticket as well. This has been another episode of 28 Days and Beyond.
Where we talk about our history, our heritage, and our culture. We'll see you next time.
Peace.